Thank you for joining me for this study of Lifeway study of Genesis, chapters 20 to 50. This is session 9. The title is called Dreamer, and the text is Genesis 37, verses 5 through 8 and 18 through 28. The lesson summary statement says, jealousy opens the door for acts of hatred. This is a very powerful lesson, one that is very needed by our churches today. The GoExploreTheBible.com website has a story about O.J. Simpson. And so I'm going to use that, and I'm going to have on the board O.J. Simpson, just that, so the people can be thinking in that direction. And I'm going to say to them, recently O.J. Simpson died, what is he remembered for? And I'm sure I'll get lots of responses from that. It's been called the trial of the century. It was in 1995. But then after there's comments, I'm going to press them and say, well, what supposedly was the motive that led to the death of Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman? And it is the issue of jealousy. The lesson is about the destruction to relationships because of jealousy. So I want to take some time just to define the term jealousy. What is jealousy and how is that different from envy? And you can find some examples of that, of course, in the definition. But the example of jealousy from the scriptures would be these men are feeling threatened of either losing their position with their father or losing his love because of Joseph. And that's the distinguishing characteristic of jealousy over envy. Jealousy has about it the threat of a loss, maybe a possession or a person or position or something of that nature. And envy is something that you wished you had that somebody else had. For example, the brothers are jealous of Joseph. They're feeling some kind of a loss, either their status or their love of the father. But envy could be found in Genesis chapter 26, verse 13 to 14. And there it says of Isaac that he prospered greatly, and the Philistines were envious of his prosperity. That's the difference between jealousy and envy. I want to explore the roots of jealousy. The dictionaries will define the roots of jealousy are insecurity and fear that a person may not realize that they have. What is the behavior of a jealous person? I might ask that question, but the three things that I found was possessiveness and aggression or manipulation. And so I want to explore this idea of jealousy, help them to understand this is the topic we're dealing with out of this text. And then I'm going to move into an overview of the chapter. Chapter 37 establishes that Joseph is hated by his brothers, verses 1 to 12. And then it also establishes that he's sold by his brothers, verses 12 to 26. There are four brief events that contribute to this tension and this jealousy. The first is in verse 2 of chapter 37 that he's a tattletale. He tells his father what his brothers are doing wrong. Now, some say he's not tattletelling, he's truth-telling, but whichever the case is, his brothers don't like it, and they don't like him for it. And then the second thing that we find in this passage is his royal robe. And we'll talk about that in the lesson, but in verses 3 and 4, his father gives him a royal robe that distinguishes him from his brothers. And they don't like it because of that. And then there are the two dreams that he has. And that is a way of confirming this is a word from God, and this will take place. Now, the terrible irony of the conflict that happens in this chapter is brought out by the many uses of the word brother. 21 times in this chapter, the word brother is used. 15 times by the narrator, 3 times by Jacob, once by Joseph, and twice by Judah. It is helping us see how terrible their jealousy is. They did this to their brother. Now, why is the Joseph story included in Moses telling this to the children of Israel? because it is a powerful story and it is a prominent story. 14 chapters of Genesis are assigned to Abraham. And Abraham is the father of the fathers. He is the basis of their faith. And yet 14 chapters are assigned to Joseph. And yet in Joseph's 14 chapters, there's 25% more content. So why is Joseph so important to this story that Moses includes him? And let me give you just 5 reasons. Number 1, Joseph's story tells how Israel got to Egypt. And that's going to open up in the next book of Exodus. Number 2, it explains why his 2 sons are part of the 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph gets, in one sense, a double blessing there. The tribe of Manasseh and the tribe of Ephraim are the sons of Joseph, and they become a part of the 12 tribes. Verse number 3 it serves as an example of trusting God through hardship. We see in Joseph this amazing work of providence in God's life. Seems like everything's going bad for him and he's doing good, and in the end God accomplishes his dreams for Joseph. Number 4, how it explains to us how Judah becomes the tribe for the kings. And number 5, it continues to give details to help us recognize and identify the Messiah. A.W. Pink, in his commentary on Genesis, comes up with 101 examples of how Joseph points us to the Messiah. So there's lots of examples in this passage that helps us be able to distinguish the Messiah. Now, the first point of the lesson is a dream. I'm going to read through the text and give some explanation of it, and then I'll also seek to engage them in it. For example, verse 5, then Joseph had a dream. The dream, the account of the dreams come at the outset of this story, which makes God the hero, God the subject, and not Joseph. It's not a tale of human success. This is a tale of God's providence, of how He's working sovereignly in our lives, regardless of what comes into our lives, to accomplish His purposes. So then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. You'll know that the name Joseph means to add, and it probably means that when he was born, his mother Rachel prayed and desired for God to add even more sons to her life and her family. And playing off of Joseph's name to add, this phrase, even more, means to add. So they don't like him because of the things previously, the tattletale and the coat and that kind of thing. And now he comes up with these dreams, and that just adds, that compounds their hatred for him. He said to them, listen to this dream that I had. And then he goes into the explanation of the dream. And so after we've dealt with the text and made some explanations about the text and engaged them in questions about the text, I want to lead them to consider this issue and the importance of jealousy. So I'm going to ask them, we tend to think of big sins and little sins. So when we talk about big sins, what are some of the big sins? What fits into that category? And I'm thinking of things like murder and adultery and stealing, big sins. They have big consequences. And what are the little sins that we think of? And there's just a number of things there. Jealousy is going to be one of those, and envy, hatred, anger, fear might be considered a little sin, gossiping, being judgmental, gluttony, all of those kinds of things we would consider, those are sins that are, in a sense, not as consequential in terms of people's lives. And then why do we view the difference? What's the difference between a big sin and a little sin? Now, I've already alluded to that in terms of my explanations to you, but I'm going to try and keep that out of the conversation. But it seems as though the distinction we make between a big sin and a little sin, and of course those are terms that we're using, is the consequences. I would much prefer for you to speak ill of me than to murder me. There's a big difference in the consequences there. But maybe it's because we don't see the full consequences of these little sins. Now that brings me to the second point, a plot. Genesis 37, verses 18 to 22. Again, I want to go through the text and I want to make some explanation. They saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. Their hate has moved past an emotion to evil action now. Their actions are revealing how they actually believe and feel towards Joseph. Now, as we deal with the text and we understand it and engage in it, after we've done that, I'm going to show them a picture. I tried to look for a picture of a woman who was scheming. And maybe you'll have the means to show them a picture on your computer or something of that nature. But I'm going to show them a picture, and then I'm going to tell them a story. So this is a case study type of approach to this. And here's my case story. As I show them the picture of this woman, this is Angela. She is jealous of Betty. Betty is called on more frequently to do solos and to be highlighted in musical presentations. Now, Angela used to be that person. If she acts on her jealousy, because she's jealous now that Betty is doing that, if she acts on her jealousy, what are some things she might do toward Betty? Now, you might want to change the context. Maybe it's Sunday school teachers who are jealous of one another. Maybe it's one wife who's jealous of another wife's husband who was promoted to a position to serve on an important board or to serve in a particular office of the church like deacon. But whatever you think would resonate with your class. But I just picked this one. So what I'm asking is, what are some things that Angela might do towards Betty acting out of her jealousy? And I'm going to take some explanation, some comments from them. Now, I'm going to prime it by saying, I'm not talking about anything you're not aware of. Now, maybe it's not between two people who are singers on the music program, but you've been around church long enough that you know this actually does occur. So what are some things that you see happening? And I want to gauge them in that conversation. Here are just some things that I put down. Complain about everything and to complain about everyone to other people. Not compliment, but criticize Betty. Find ways to say something negative about her. Maybe quit singing in the band. Or to spread rumors about Betty or anyone else in the music program. How about do it in such a way that you create camps in the church? I don't understand this, but when two people seem to be at odds, for whatever strange reason, the church seems to divide up into camps and pick which side they're wanting to be on. That is just a work of the devil. That's not what Christians are called to. Christians are called to be intercessors and reconcilers in this matter instead of dividing up into camps. But you've seen people do that, possibly in your church or some church. Put them down to others. There's just all kinds of things. What I'm wanting them to see is the actions that come out of jealousy and to identify those things, to recognize those things, maybe even to begin to recognize them in themselves. But I'm wanting to help them see this action of jealousy and it being acted upon. That leads to the outcome of jealousy, and that's point number 3, a pit. Again, I want to read through the text. I want to give some explanation. And I'm telling them, I want you to be looking for the emotions that must be exhibited in this text. Let me just read through it and show you what I'm talking about. When Joseph came to his brothers. Now, Joseph's been traveling about 50 miles. He's been alone. He couldn't find his brothers, and he had this encounter with a man who told them where they had gone. his father Jacob is concerned about them. They're in an area where they had left maybe a few years ago, and that's the area where Levi and Simeon had killed the men in that city. So his father is concerned about him, and that may be the motivation for why Jacob would send Joseph by himself, a 17-year-old boy, on this journey. So what do you suppose Joseph's feelings were when he finally saw his brothers in the distance? And so I'd write that on the board. Now, when Joseph came to his brothers, now notice this, they stripped off Joseph's robe, the long-sleeved robe that he had on. The word stripped off is a violent action. It is wording that is used for skinning or flaying an animal. So just picture for me what that scene was like. How did they take that coat off of him? What do you think were in the hearts of those men when they were doing this? And then notice what Moses does. He could have stopped right there at the word robe. They stripped off Joseph's robe. But Moses wants us to understand something that helped them, one, maybe to identify him in him coming to them, but also what's motivating this violence, this hatred in their hearts. The long-sleeved robe that he had on. You see what he did? He amplified that. We know it's that robe, but he wants us to understand. This, the King James Version is the one who called it the coat of many colors. And the wording, the very wording of this robe means literally to the palms and to the soles. So it was talking about, as this translation says, a long-sleeved garment. Now maybe it did have different colors to it to make it beautiful, but only someone who wasn't engaged in hard labor would wear a robe like this. Most of the robes they would wear would have shorter sleeves on their arms and shorter over their legs because it was for working. And a long-sleeved robe and a long robe to the ankles would get in their way. So when his father gave Joseph this, they could have very well got the message. He intends to make Joseph the leader of the clan because he's been given the regal robe. He's been given the ruler's robe. So that's probably entering into what's happening here. And then verse 24, then they took him and threw him into the pit. Now ask them if they have ever read a description of what this pit was like. This pit could be anywhere from 6 feet to 20 feet deep. And it's like a bottle in that day. It had a narrow neck and then it ballooned out at the bottom. And there's no way of getting out of that. And this is what they threw him in. So just imagine, he's without his coat and he's in this pit. He may have been roughed up and his nose bleeding and he's in this pit. He's got some scratches and bruises on him. He's been dropped however far down into this pit. So he's no doubt frightened and hurting and worried. So what is it like for him in this pit? There's no getting out. He doesn't get out of this pit unless his brothers help him out. The pit was empty, without water, and he happens to be in a desert. Think about what the consequences are for him. Verse 25, they sat down to eat a meal. Now think about what's going on here. Here's Joseph in a pit. He doesn't have any food. He doesn't have any water. He doesn't have probably adequate clothing to keep warm. And what do? They sit down to eat a meal. What's going on in the heart of those men? How callous they are. When they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin going down to Egypt. This was a very common substance that the Egyptians used. They used it for medicine. They used it for incense. They used these things for embalming. That's an interesting touch to it, isn't it? Verse 26, Judah said to his brothers, what do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? So Judah is wanting gain. What is he going to gain if they sell Jacob into slavery? Now, I know you know the rest of the story, but I mean, immediately, what are they going to gain? And I'm looking for things, well, they're going to get money, and they're going to get rid of this troublemaking brother. They're going to avoid committing murder, all of those kinds of things. Maybe they will gain their father's affections now that he's been removed. Maybe that's a part of it as well. But anyway, Judah says that we're going to gain if we don't kill him. Instead, we sell him into slavery. Verse 27, come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he's our brother. Isn't that an interesting comment? Our flesh. And his brothers agreed. So again, I'm looking for what are the emotions that are happening here. And then verse 28. When the Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit. What do you think was going on in Joseph's mind when they lowered a rope and they were going to pull him out? Do you think he might have thought, these guys are just putting a cruel, mean joke on me? And so he gets out of the pit, and here's what he discovers. They have sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites who took Joseph to Egypt. That's as far as Joseph means, he is never coming back. So describe for me the emotions of Joseph being sold as a slave. What does that mean for him? Fear, suffering, deprivation. He's never coming back. He's going to Egypt. All of those emotions are involved in that matter. What is involved with the men? Joseph, no doubt, is pleading and begging and making promises. I'll never tattle on you again. I won't wear the coat anymore again. I'm wanting them to see the awful scene this is. This would have been, if you made it into a Hollywood movie, this would have been a heart-wrenching scene. Now, let's go back to Angela and Betty. Based on your experience, what are the possible outcomes in the church as a result of Angela's jealousy? Now, here are some things I came up with. And what I'm trying to do, teachers, is I'm trying to help them see the seriousness of jealousy, the power of jealousy for its destruction on our lives and on the life of our church. Division in the church, hurt feelings, God's blessing being lifted off the church. Imagine that, a person's jealousy, not dealing with their jealousy, and it eventually results in God's blessing lifted off the church. How terrible. Satan using it to create additional troubles in the church. The spiritual growth, the numerical growth of the church is stopped. New believers are discouraged and stop attending. Friendships are broken. Testimony that we're no different than the world. Now, if those are true, and I believe they're true, and if you've seen that, do you see how powerful this lesson is in terms of confronting our class and confronting us with this issue of jealousy? Now, if jealousy opens the door for acts of hatred, how do you shut the door on jealousy? And this is how I want to conclude. What did the brothers fear? What did the brothers resent? So we'll talk about that. But the point that I'm making at is a person should, when they recognize they're operating out of jealousy, they need to confront their fears. They need to ask themselves, what is it I'm so fearful of losing? Is it something legitimate? Or is it something that's selfish on my part? Confront your fears. The second thing is, God was working in this story. When he comes with these dreams are from God. The fact that he has two of them is an affirmation that they're from God. In fact, after the second one, it tells us of Jacob that he reflects on these things. This is unusual. So let's say that they come to recognize this was God speaking to their family. And so they could have chosen to be grateful. They could have chosen to praise Joseph instead of sell him into slavery, because praise is recognizing that which is good. Think about Angela. Angela could have praised God for the gift that was given to Betty. Third, so the first one is confront your fears. The second one is look for the work of God that's taking place, because our jealousy causes us to overlook it. And the third thing that I'm saying in terms of my conclusion is some kind, courageous, open conversation would have helped possibly to resolve the feelings and the misunderstanding. It would have been good if one of those brothers, maybe Reuben, the oldest, maybe Judah, who appears to be a leader as well, if he would have stood up and said, we need to have a family conversation about what's going on here. We can't even say shalom to our little brother. And that's not the way brothers are supposed to. And they could have had an open meeting, or they could have had maybe as individuals, one of them talk with the other brothers and say, we're wrong about this. We've got to treat this boy and help him. I'm just simply saying, somewhere along the line, there needed to be a kind, courageous, and open conversation about feelings and misunderstandings. My friends, this is a powerful lesson. I am praying for you as God uses you to teach this lesson about jealousy. You are going to do so much good in people's lives by just surfacing this issue so that the Holy Spirit can speak to people from the Word of God. God bless you.